Welcome everyone to Enterprise.expert, a monthly webinar. Today is November 16th. This would be the November version of the webinar. And today's topic is going to be custom reports in QuickBooks Enterprise. Today's content will spend about 5 minutes just introducing the whole concept of Enterprise.expert, and we'll talk about other recommended events as well. We will do an introduction of some basic QuickBooks custom reporting topics that are extremely important for everyone to know and kind of be on the same page for, because these basic concepts are really the foundation of building any custom reports. Then we're going to do a demonstration, and we're going to create several QuickBooks custom reports, and we'll leave the last 5 minutes for Q&A, assuming there is some. Now, who is Enterprise.expert? It's a community of experts in the enterprise level technology. We communicate in multiple ways. We do this monthly webinar, which a lot of you are registered and watching it live as we speak. We can also interact via the website. There's a blog. If you go to enterprise.expert, no need to put www or .com, just enterprise.expert. Add some comments to the blogs. We're developing the content that's there. And our Facebook group, which is active. So you just search Enterprise Expert in Facebook, and you can join the group, ask questions, continue the conversation. Now, what does this mean? By enterprise, we're focused on medium-sized businesses that already have a proven concept or are ongoing with heavy reliance on technology in order to run their operations. By technology, we're going to have a strong focus on software, hardware, cloud-based solutions, things like that. Right now, there's a really strong focus on accounting, of course, because that's my particular area of expertise. But as we bring other experts in the technology enterprise world, we'll maybe discuss other things as well. And by expert, that would be welcoming everyone that has any sort of experience in this field that wants to share it, either by coming onto the webinar, blogging in the website, or joining the Facebook group. So this webinar series is every month, the third Wednesday of every month. You register once, you access all the episodes. We may have special episodes coming up where we'll have some sponsored content or collaborated content with third-party developers or other software developers. We do not offer any CPE for accountants or ACE for certified QuickBooks Pro advisors at the moment. And for this year, for 2016, we're focused 100% on QuickBooks Enterprise. On 2017, we're going to start seeing other technology being showcased. About the host, myself, my name is Hector Garcia. I'm an accountant. My main area of practice is accounting and integrated technology consulting from Miami, Florida. And I help people get QuickBooks Enterprise and connect it with other systems and stuff like that. So if you need to contact me, there's my email, hector@garciacpa.com. The other recommended event that I'm involved with is another webinar series called QB Power Hour, which is every other week. And next episode will be actually tomorrow. I don't know why that says the 20th. It will be tomorrow, the same time, 12 p.m. And we will discuss budgets, forecasting, cash flow projections, and business planning in QuickBooks Desktop. If you're not registered for that, make sure to go to qbpowerhour.com. All right, so let's jump right into the topics. So the first most important topic to understand about building any sort of custom report in QuickBooks is to be able to identify the difference between the source of the transaction versus the destination or the detail of the transaction. For the time being, refer as the source as summary and as the destination as detail. So in a check, for example, as you see on the screenshot, anything that's on top on the header of the transaction, bank account name, payee, check number, date, amount, address, and memo, that belongs to the source. And anything you see under that contains more of the transaction details, that would be the destination. So the expense account, the individual account of the expense account, the memo of each expense account, the customer job being job costed, and the class being used. So just kind of keep that in mind, because when you build a report, you have to stop and think about, well, am I looking for information that belongs to the source, or am I looking for information that belongs to the destination? So let's dig a little bit deeper. Now, the reason why source and destination, or source and detail, or summary and detail, however you want to see it, is so important to understand is because when we pull any custom report in QuickBooks, there's one filter called the detail level. And this is where we tell QuickBooks, listen, just make it all, which means you can extract data from either the source or the destination, which will look quote unquote like an all debits, all credits type of um, report. If you click summary only, then you're restricting to only see source data. And when we do the example, this is going to make tons of sense. The transaction total, right? No, none of the details. And you may see the word split there. And the word split in a summary of the transaction just means that there's multiple line items dividing on where that other side of the equation is hitting in our financial statements. Now, uh, there's an option called all except summary, and all except summary is going to be only to include the detail, so to exclude the summary. Now, something really, really important to know is that the all except summary only works in accrual basis reports. If you ever try to pull a cash basis report that the summary only, it doesn't work on the cash basis report. That note actually belongs in the top. So the summary only works in the cash basis report, and the details are, let me just put that under, and the details will not work in an accrual basis report. And we'll explain about that, because in a cash basis pulls only details, where accrual can pull both. Now, additional note, really important. Some of the summary information will copy over to the detail, or to the destination in whenever the information is lacking, but it will not work vice versa. So none of the detailed information goes into the summary. So just keep that in mind. I know for now it just seems like a lot of sort of technical jargon. Just keep it in mind when we do an example. I promise you it's going to make tons of sense. The next slide talks about, depending on the transaction type, you will know what account is being hit, or generally what type of account is being hit on the source or the destination. So for example, a check, the source is always going to be a bank account, and the detail could be an expense account, or actually any account that we use from the chart of accounts. A deposit, the source is always going to be a bank, and the detail is by default on deposited funds, but it could also be any account being used. So that this chart just gives you an example of, what are the default source accounts, and those don't change, but the detail, which for most part, you could change them based on the transaction details. Okay. Now, once we go into the report filters, which is what we're going to do in the example, we are going to go to the filter section, and we're going to choose all the specific filters in which we want to discriminate the report by. So we don't want to see certain information, we have to use the filter for that. If we want to see certain information, we also have to use the filter for that. So the most commonly used filters, which are the ones that I recommend if you're going to build custom reports that you memorize and know these like the back of your head, are going to be detail level, date, account, name, class, item, amount, transaction type, page status, posting status, cleared, and memo. I guarantee that if you know at least those, I believe those are like 10, you're going to be able to build 80-90% of the reports that you want just with those. So I know there's a lot of filters out there and it's kind of noisy, but if you just know those, you'll be just fine. Now, once we know and understand the filters that we're doing, we also need to understand the difference between the two type of custom reports we can build. We can build a transaction detail report, in which contains line by line, transaction by transaction, and based on the detail level filter, we can choose to only show the summary, only show the details, or both. Now, you have one dimension that you can group the data by, which is that total by option, which allows you to group them. And there's about 10 or 12 different options there that we can group them by, and we'll do an example of that as well. And then when we talk about detail reports specifically, this concept of columns has to do with data fields. So the columns are the data fields inside the transaction. Now, changing topics a little bit, custom summary reports. Now, these are different than detail reports because these do not contain line by line, transaction by transaction. They contain a summarized or a total amount. Okay, so it eventually just adds all the information inside those dimensions. Now, the dimensions, which are the rows and the columns to make sort of like an X and Y axis type of report, can be chosen on the first page, and you have a group of basic fields that you can use for the row and the column. Now, those are limited to a few that QuickBooks gives you. For example, in the column section of a summary report, you get about 25 choices. Okay, that the columns are actually have a lot more choices than rows in QuickBooks. And the reason for that is because in QuickBooks, you can summarize by time frame, day, week, quarter, year, that sort of thing, month, only on the columns. You cannot do it on the rows. So never think of a report that you can build in which the rows are going to contain any sort of time frame. Okay. Now, when it comes to those are columns. When it comes to rows, you get about the same set of choices with the exception of the time frame. So that's the one that just kind of differentiates columns and rows in the summary report, is you can only do time frame in the column section. Now, you cannot have conflicting dimensions. Like, for example, if I'm already using name like customer as a row, I can't use vendors as a column. So I cannot use any related or semi-related fields because that will create a conflict. Now, some of the important report preferences, and we'll also do a couple of examples of this, is you can show and hide the description of the account or the description of the item through the preferences, right? A lot of people get confused about, where do I go in my report filters to show and hide the description? And the answer is it's not part of the filters, it's part of the report preferences. So that's from the edit preferences menu. And then one really important one to know is the default report formatting, which allows you to basically choose the font size, the font color, et cetera, of every report that shows up by default, right? That way you don't have to edit every single one. Okay, so let's jump right into the product. Go ahead and close the company file I'm not using, and let me launch the company file here. And by the way, you're welcome to type any questions in the question section, and then during the next break or so, I'll go over those questions. Okay, so let's jump right into QuickBooks. Let's start by talking about the source destination or source detail concept. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new check. Okay, and then on the check itself, I'm going to go ahead and choose the bank account and the payee. And notice that I created these called source just to make it really easy for you to see. So I got the source bank account, the source payee. I'm going to make this, let's say $100, and I'll date this 12/30/2018 so that I can pull it later. Then I'm going to type here on the memo, source memo, and then under class, I'm going to select source class. Again, I created these with the word source to make it really, really easy to see. Now under account, I created an expense account called expense. Let's call it source. I'll just pick a regular expense account. Let me choose here current truck expense, and then we'll do here office supplies. Now I'm going to split these just to show it very easy to see. I'm going to split this and put $75 in one expense category and $25 in a different expense category. Now under memo, I'm going to put here source. I'm going to put here detail memo 1, and then detail memo 2. And then I'm going to also job cost these, and I'm going to create a select the customer here that I also put the word detail to just make it extremely easy for you to see it on the report. So notice that I have a vendor name up here that is different than my customer name. I have a class up here that is different than my class on the destination side. I have two chart of account categories that are obviously different than the source bank account category. And so everything is pretty much different. So let me go ahead and save this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control Y on the keyboard. What Control Y does, it opens up the transaction journal, and we can now actually see the guts of the transaction. So what we see here by default, we have here the transaction date, we have here name, and notice that the first line shows source vendor, which is actually the payee of the check. The memo says source memo, the the account says source bank, and the class says source class. And then when you go to the second and third line, you see very obvious that under name, you no longer see the vendor's name, now you see the customer's name. And then on the memo, you don't see the check memo, you see the individual line memo. Same thing for class, same thing for amount. Let's dig a little bit deeper, okay? Let's say, for example, that I only want to see the source. So I'm gonna click on the Customize Reports button, and then I'm gonna click on Filters, and then I'm gonna go down to Detail Level. And that's the filter I was referring to, detail level. Okay, so in detail level, I'm going to select summary only. Okay, and then I'm going to hit OK. And then you see the report only shows the summary side of the transaction. Now, if I click on Customize Report, Filter, go to Detail Level. Now I'm going to switch it and show all except summary. And I'll hit OK. Now I get only the details of the transaction. Now this is extremely crucial because this is pretty much the very first step into understanding what information I'm trying to extract from a report. Okay, so let me go ahead and hit escape. Okay, so I closed everything. Now let's start building a detailed report. So I'm going to go to reports, then I'm going to go to custom reports, then I'm going to go to transaction detail. Okay, so I'm basically building a report from scratch. Then I'm going to go into, I'm just going to hit OK for now just to kind of see what happens. Okay, and that's going to be a report that shows a whole bunch of transactions for a specific time period. But let's say I only want to see invoices. So if I want to filter invoices, I have to go to transaction type. So I'm going to click on Customize Report. And then I'm going to click on Filters. And then I'm going to go down and look for a filter called Transaction Type. Once I select on Transaction Type, on the drop down, which I got a couple choices now, I can click on multiple transaction types and I can just find it through here. So I can find the one that I want and then hit OK. That's one option. Or two, hit the drop down and through the scroll up and down menu that I have, find what I want, which happens to be invoice. Now, the only reason why you want to do multiple is because maybe you want to do invoices and sales receipts, right? That's something that could be done if I want to see both. And we hit OK, and then OK. Now, what ends up happening here is that on this particular time period, there's basically only one invoice. You see right there, invoice 1045. However, this becomes just really confusing because we see a whole bunch of lines, we see a debit, we see a credit, a whole bunch of blanks in there, and we'll talk about defaults in a second, just so we can discuss that. But this becomes confusing to some people because someone maybe just wants to see the summary of the invoice. I'm going to do the whole year. I'm going to do this fiscal year. That way it's just a lot clearer. So as we go down, we see debits, we see credits, we see a whole bunch of information. And most people, when they say, hey, can you show me an invoice report? They don't really ask for the details. So what do I mean by that? If you look at the very first line we have here, this is invoice 1047 totaling 21,000. I'm going to double click on it real quick, which will display the report. And then we see that there's a whole bunch of line items, 650, 780, 845. Let me hit save and close. That's what you essentially see here on the credit side. So if I don't want to see the details, I'm going to go to customize report. I'm going to go into filters. Then I'm going to go into detail level. And then I'm going to click summary only. And then I'm going to hit OK. So that is going to now exclude all of the details of the transaction and only show me the summary. Now, what are some pros and cons to this? Okay. One of the pros is I don't get to see any details. The con is that sales tax will be included in here. Okay, that's actually a kind of a big deal. So if you want to see something that excludes sales tax, you have to use the details. You can't use the overall, because in this overall portion, there is no discrimination in terms of whether the items are hitting an income account, an expense account, or a sales tax account. That would all be irrelevant. So in this type of report, we are seeing the source, and we're going to see the totality of the invoice, including sales tax if there happens to be some. Now, what about showing or hiding some information? Like, for example, maybe I don't need to see so many columns. So I can actually start getting rid of some of these columns in two ways. One, I can click on the Customize Report button on the top left, and I can manually deselect what I don't want. So let's say, for example, I don't want to see memo. I would just uncheck that and hit OK, and then the memo goes away. Or I can go even faster, where I can start just manually collapsing them by selecting them and basically resizing into themselves. Okay, let's say that's it. And let me get rid of type also. Okay, so that will give me date, number, name, debit, credit amount, and balance. Now, for some people, in the case of a filter report like this, debit and credit would be redundant, and then balance is probably just too much information, and I'll just want to see the total in the very bottom. So I can just get rid of balance, and then I'm also going to create a new column, which is called amount. I'm going to click on Customize Report, and then I'm going to search here in the column box. I'm going to search for amount, and then I'm going to go ahead and select that one, and then hit OK. And then I will now can get rid of debit and credit, right? And then that would just show an amount, right? So in this case, it would just be a positive amount, just because of the type of report that we're looking at. Now, let's talk about dimensioning the report as well. Now, this report contains sales from multiple customers or multiple jobs. It's possible that I can group them together based on customer jobs. So I can click on total by on the top of the screen, and I can click on customer, and that will basically group my sales by customer. And if I get to do that, or if I do that, then the column for customer becomes redundant, because I see it here, but I also see it on the header. So I could also at that point get rid of the customer name as well. And then this really hits on the principle that less is better. In many reports, I'm an accountant and a consultant myself, and people ask me to build custom reports for them. So one of the things that becomes the single most important thing to a lot of people is make the report have just the exact amount of information that I need. I really don't want anything additional to that, and that's basically a philosophy that I do for reports. Okay, so that's one way to sort of group sales by customer in a summary way, no details, in a detailed report. Now, let me go ahead and collapse this a little bit, and then I'm going to show you in contrast what would be a very similar report in terms of the information being displayed, but in a different type of report. We're going to do now a summary report. So we're going to click on the reports menu, custom reports, and we're going to click on summary. Okay. Then I'm going to select date range. I also do this fiscal year. And then under columns, in this case, I'm going to leave it in total because I really don't want any dimension of the columns. But on the rows, I'm going to put customer. Now I'm going to go up here to filters. And then the most important, one of the most important filters in a custom summary report would be my account, like from which account I'm pulling information from. So if I'm looking at just raw sales, like for example, in our detail report, we were looking at summary. So we would essentially looking at potentially just raw sales. I want to go into account. And then instead of having all ordinary income slash expenses, I want to pick just all ordinary income accounts. So again, that's the filter we're going to choose, all ordinary income accounts. And then I'm going to hit OK. Then let me bring this to the right. Let me just put them here next to each other by tiling vertically. So now we see essentially a very similar report. For example, we see we have a customer called Detail Customer 2 that has an invoice of 8,900. Same thing here. Cruz Albert has 93,000. Same thing here. For example, Cottage New Construction has 335 on my summary report, but it has 331 on the detail report. There must be something on the detail side, maybe one of the items and such that is not hitting it the exact same way, and that could be causing it. So we could explore it. We could go one by one and figure out which one, if really wanted to do so, we can go down and figure out which one is causing the difference, which I think is this one right here. So you look at this invoice right here, invoice 1046 is a total of 30,150, but on this side, but in the sales report, we probably have right here. So we have an item, this item here called retention. This item really affects my balance sheet. And the issue is that when we pulled this report, let me get out of here again. When we pulled this report, the summary, we strictly told it that we want only income accounts, where on this side, we never gave it the chance to tell it I only want income accounts. I want the summary value of the transaction. So that's kind of like the concept behind building a summary and a detailed report. And you can see that there's some slight contracts. Again, not everybody uses balance sheet accounts in transactions for prepayments or retainers. But if you do, you got to keep those things handy. Okay, let me go ahead and hit escape. And someone's asking about how exactly did I tile those reports together. Well, I'll show you real quick. I'm going to click on window, close all, and that will basically close the windows together. And then I'm going to go to reports, company financial, profit and loss, and I'm going to follow the keyboard shortcut to make it as fast as possible. So actually, if you look at reports and you see how the R is highlighted, and then you go to company financial and you see how the F is highlighted, and then you see profit and loss standard, how the S is highlighted, that means that if you press Alt RFS, that will pull a profit and loss. So I'll do it just with the keyboard. Alt RFS, that will pull a profit and loss. And then I'll do Alt RFB, as in boy, that will pull the balance sheet. And then I'm going to go to window, tile vertically, but I will also use the keyboard shortcut. So I'll do WV. So Alt WV, that will tile them next to each other. So if you really wanted to, let's assume for a minute that you're a QuickBooks consultant and you really want to impress someone when you first look at QuickBooks, first thing you want to do is the minute you log in, you do Alt W A, which will close everything, and then do Alt RFB. You can leave the Alt button down, Alt RFS, then leave the Alt button down, WV, and basically within like 10 keystrokes, you get P&L, balance sheet, all next to each other, tile vertically, and trust me, that will impress anyone. whenever you're pulling reports. And this is the most common thing that we do is we pull a profit and loss and balance sheet for analysis. Let me hit escape. I'll just keep one report open here. Now, another few really important things about customizing a report is customizing the look. So if you right click on the keyboard, right, you have to right click on the keyboard, you're going to get a window pop up. Sorry, not on the keyboard, on the mouse. You right click on the mouse, or you click on the right button, you're going to get this window pop up that allows you to change essentially the font, the size, and then hit OK and hit yes. And basically all the font and all the size will be changed on the spot. So if you wanted to make a report's font bigger, real quick, you just right click, change the size. And that does in fact reflect on the printout. So when you go print it, that will affect the printout. So just be careful that big fonts obviously take more ink and more space on the printer. Now, really important thing about printouts. Let me just do here a all. You can also, when you print a financial statement, you can break them down by sections by clicking on this little box here. Again, this often forgotten box here called page break after each major grouping. So if I click on that one, basically in a balance sheet scenario, we're going to get assets in one page, and then we're going to get liabilities and equities on a second page. Really, really clean. For longer financial statements, that becomes something really useful. Same thing with dealing with a profit and loss. If you split the major groupings, you will get income and cost of goods sold on one page and expenses on another page. Now you can also force to do one page wide but one page high, and if you do that, QuickBooks will now change the fonts around to make it fit. So you don't want to mess too much with the fonts to avoid these issues if you're trying to then force the width and the height when it comes to the printout. Okay, let me hit escape. Let me pull up a profit and loss again and show you something else really important with report formatting. So when you pull the report, the default formatting is what is set, right? So exactly how you see it, that's how it comes up. If I want to change what comes up by default, like if you're sitting there having to zoom in and making that font bigger every time, change the preference. So we're going to go to Edit, Preferences, and then we'll play with a couple of these preferences to show you. So for example, here under Company Preferences, there's a couple of important ones to know. For example, here where it says Show Accounts By, okay, if I click on Name and Description, and then I'm going to hit OK, I want you to take a look at how the income accounts will have a parenthesis next to it. I'm going to hit OK. You see how every account has a parenthesis next to it? That is because in my chart of accounts, any account that I pick, let me just pick here I'll pick my sales account here, my default sales account. If I give, whoops, let me right click and hit edit. If I put something in the description here saying Hector is great, okay, that's part of the description. For the most part, that information is hidden. You don't see it on the chart of accounts, but if you decide to show it on the financial statement or on the reports by having that option there to show the description, that's an option. Now, what are some applicable situations in which I've used that? For example, I have a client that we do all the financial statements in English, but a few of the owners, a few of the users want the financial statements in Spanish. So what we do is we translate all the accounts into Spanish, and then when it's time to give them the report, we choose description only, and then it will be based only on the description. So that becomes just a kind of a really interesting way of working with that. Okay. Now on the item side, that's also really important. Let me show you. Let me pull up an item report, and that's an area of a lot of concern because a few people. Let me do like a sales by item report. Okay, because a few people don't want to see in parentheses the description, especially for some of these like really long descriptions that take a lot of space on the report. So if you're working with items in which the item name itself it's clearly identified where you don't need a description, then you want to hide the descriptions that come up by default there. So the way we do that is we go to Edit Preferences, and then under Company Preferences, we're going to take out name and description and put name only. And just notice once I hit OK, all of those parentheses with descriptions go away. And that's important because for some people, it's just more information that they want to endure. And when it comes to detail reports, that's also kind of a big deal. And I'm going to show you that in a second. So let me pull up a profit and loss report, or let's just do it better. Let me show a detailed report that contains details from an invoice. I'm going to go to transaction detail. I'm going to click here dates. I'm going to click this fiscal year. Under filters, again, I'm going to choose transaction type, and then I'm going to pick invoice. So kind of the same premise as before. Then under detail level, I'm going to do all except summary, which is going to only include the details of the invoice. So I'm going to hit OK. And there it is. And I'm also going to enable, because it's not enabled by default, the specific item. So I'm going to go into customize report. Under columns, I'm going to go to item, select that item, and then the description, and then hit OK. So there's my item, there's my description. Now, if I wanted that description to be part of the item name, then I would go to Edit Preferences, Company Preferences under Reports and Graphs, and then where it says Show Items By, I would click Name and Description, hit OK, and then you're going to see the descriptions as part of the item. Again, it's really important preferences. You choose what's better for you. I'm not specifically saying that you want to show them or you don't want to show them. What I'm saying is you can do whatever you want. Now, here where it says item description, it's a really, really good question in terms of what description shows up there, the default item description or the description in the invoice. So let me show you. I'm going to double click on there, and I'm actually going to change the description on the invoice just to show you. I'm going to put here invoice description of item and hit save and close. Now you will notice on the report, okay, where am I? Let me hit refresh. In the report where it says item description, this is still coming from the specific item name, okay? But the one that I typed in is now actually the memo. So in detail reports, memo means the description of the invoice, for example, whereas item description means the description of the item list. So I'll just show you real quick by that. So I'm going to go into item list, and then I'm going to go into this floor framing and hit edit. And I'm going to change this to item description. Okay. And I'm going to hit OK and go back into that report. And now you can see how it says item description, which is what I just typed in, which is different than what we actually put in the invoice, which is invoice description of item. So those are really, really important things to keep in mind about how descriptions and memos work in QuickBooks. Now, another kind of semi-interesting thing here is if I actually go into that invoice and you see the actual memo box, okay, so the actual memo box in there, the actual memo box has nothing. I'm going to put here memo from invoice. Okay, so I'm typing memo from invoice, and then I'm going to hit save and close. Now, most people will assume that if they're pulling a report and they're looking at a column very clearly that says memo, that memo should show up there. But the answer is no, because in a detailed report, the memo is going to be from the line item memo, not from the transaction memo. For me to see that memo that I just typed in there, I would have to do, and if you're guessing it, you guessed it, I would have to look at the summary portion of it, or maybe all in that particular case. So let me hit OK. and then we'll go down and we'll see it right there, memo from invoice. So that memo, it's now part of the source of the transaction, not part of the detail of the transaction. Now I'm going to double click on that one again, and I'm going to go in and erase the description altogether, right? So you see that there's no description there, no memo, and then I'll hit save and close. And you will notice now something really interesting happened. Even though I erased it, QuickBooks filled it with something else. So the way QuickBooks works is if you're missing any description or memo on a line item, it will grab it from the source and fill it in with information there, as long as it's blank, okay? Because if I actually just put, let's say, for example, I'm just gonna put a dot there, just a period, and hit save and close, you will see that that will now be replaced with a period, which is QuickBooks is doing what is there, just pulling the characters that are there, which happen to be a period. So I think those are extremely, really important things to keep in mind related to memos, source, and destination. So I wanted to really go deep into source and destination because I find that to be one of the really important ones. Okay, so let's jump into the next example, which specifically has to do with an advanced setting that affects our payment date. Okay, now this is going to get a little bit tricky, but trust me, this is going to be super interesting, especially if what you pull generally, or some of the reports that you have to pull, have to specifically have to do with showing things whether they're paid or unpaid. I find that to be just really interesting. Okay, so let me pull up a report, and I'm going to stick with a summary report. A detailed report with summary data of invoices. So I'm going to go to transaction detail. I'm going to go to all. Actually, let me do last month. And then I'm going to go to filters. I'm going to go into transaction type. And then I'm going to select invoice again. And then under detail level, I'm going to do summary only. And then I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm just going to narrow down and just kind of get rid of some of these columns here just to avoid any confusion. So I'm going to get rid of most of these. Okay. But I'm going to add a new column. I'm going to add a new column, a new field called paid. This is the paid status. Paid status. Okay. I'm going to go to edit, and I'm going to go to preference. Oh, sorry, not edit preferences. Whoops. I'm going to go to customize report, and then under columns, I'm going to click paid. Right. This is called the paid status. Okay. This will actually render the word paid or the word unpaid. Okay, this is going to get really interesting really soon, I promise you. So right now, this invoice, the second one, 1053, is showing unpaid. Okay, now notice the date range of the reports. This is limited to November 30 of 2018. I'm going to go in and receive a payment against that invoice. So I'm going to go to customer. I'm going to click on receive payments, and I'm going to select a December date, so something after the report date. And who was that customer? That was Kitchen Remodel. And I'll go ahead and bring in the whole payment in, let's say as a check number 123. And again, the payment date is 12/15/2018, even though the invoice period that is showing is up to 11/30. So one of the questions is, in your head, before I hit save and close, in your head, are you expecting paid to show unpaid, or are you expecting it to be paid? Put it on the chat box. What are you expecting to see after I hit save there? Are you expecting to see paid or unpaid? Okay, so yeah, so I think most of you, a few of you, one person said unpaid, most of you said paid. Okay, so let me show you. So let me go ahead and hit save and close. Now that is showing paid, because this reporting date has to do with the specific transactions that I'm displaying. On the report, I haven't told it anywhere to take a connected transaction, which is a received payment, and give me information about the date of the connected transaction. Therefore, as of now, even though the report is limited to, let's say, November 30th, that invoice will still show pay. Now, there's a really interesting, cool kind of hidden thing in here. We're going to go to Customize Report, and then we're going to click on Advance. And if you've never been here before, this will kind of blow your mind. Because this is something, if you've never been here before, this is something that you're going to be like, oh, I wasted so many hours of my life trying to figure this out. This little switch can change based on when the invoice was paid. So if I click on report date and then I hit OK and then OK, now that's going to show that that's a little bit tricky because the filter goes away. But with that information that I pulled up, I can now pull a different column. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to go to Customize Report, and then I'm going to go to Open Balance, and I'm going to select the Open Balance column and hit OK. And you see here where the open balance on that particular invoice is $93,000 as of the report date. But if I go to Customize Report, again, Advance, and I switch it from report date to current and hit OK, the open balance is 0. Okay, so that's a really important piece in which I'm going to change the nature of what the report is showing, because I can either calculate it based on the report date or based on whether or not it's paid at any point in time. Okay, really, really important piece of information. Okay, so that's really important. That's on the advanced portion. Now, same thing happens with aging. Let me show you. There's a column here called aging, and aging will calculate, how old or how much overdue this invoice is. So let me go into the invoice and let me go ahead and delete. I'm going to delete that payment just so we can know exactly what that means. I'm going to go to delete payment, and I'm going to make this invoice terms. I'm going to make it due on receipt, and then hit save and close. Yes. So in this particular case, this report doesn't have any aging. Let me just do it a little bit different. Let me do the beginning of the month. So in this particular case, the aging on this invoice calculated based on the report date is 29 days. Okay, because this is set up based on the current. But if I click, for example, I'm going to click something more current. I'm gonna select the report to be today's date. Then all of a sudden my aging will change because that is now tied to my report. Okay, so that's a really important piece that is going to be tied to my report. So that's kind of like, how we work with the aging field, with the open balance field, and the paid field. Okay, now something else that's really important for people to know. If I go to Customize Report and I go to Filters, and there's actually a paid filter status, and I change that to closed and I hit OK, only the invoices that have been paid, in this case, let me just go back to November. It's going to be much easier. So that have been paid up to November are going to show in here. Now, let me go back and receive that payment again for that customer that we were talking about. So let me receive that payment. And that was, I believe it was the kitchen remodel. Yeah, that's the one that it was. Let me receive that payment again, right? And since that one has been paid, that's going to show up there. However, if I go to Customize Report and click on Advanced, and then I click on Report Date, again, remember, I am running together hand in hand with the Paid Status filter. So because I got the Paid Status filter and also telling it up to today's date, when I hit OK, even though that invoice has been paid today, December 15th, let's assume it's December 15th, it's still not going to show on the report because we're telling it to exclude it if it hasn't been paid up to the report date. Okay, so that's a really really important piece, because some people say, show me a report for last month for invoices that were not paid last month, and there's the answer. Or somebody may say, show me a report for last month's invoices that haven't been paid as of today. So those are really important pieces, especially language is really important. So in the case of this particular report that shows, where's my, let's do date, I'm going to hit last month, that shows last month's invoices that have been paid, however, have been paid as of the report date. That's going to give you an idea of what we should title that report. Okay, so that report in this case should carry a title that explains that. So we can put here last month's invoices, and I can put paid up to last month, right? So that would make tons of sense, because I specifically told on the title that they're only showing paid if they were paid up to last month. So if this was a different filter, if this was current like this, then I would have to change this to be paid as of today. So report titling is really, really important. In my opinion, report titling is your lifeblood in this whole thing, because if you label the report wrong and you got some weird filters that you're working with, and the user of the report doesn't really understand what contextually they're using, it becomes very difficult. Now, yes, I can click on show here and I can show the filters. And this is if you're working with 2017, they added the filters to show on the top. So if you actually print the report, you can see on the next page the filters that were used. But come on, realistically speaking, what average QuickBooks user looks at those filters and says, "Oh yeah, I understand the information that's being shown here," if you're not specifically putting it on the title. So that's a really important piece of information that I implore people to just keep in mind, especially when it comes to report title. Now, another just kind of couple of quirky things about reports. Let me go ahead and show a profit and loss real quick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you where in the profit and loss report, I can display accounts that are not being used. Okay, so right now it is displaying every account that is being used only. However, my chart of accounts is a little bit bigger than what we're seeing here. So I'm going to click on Customize Report. I'm going to go to Advanced, again, the Advanced tab. But now we're not looking at a detail report. Now we're looking at a summary report, which contains different options on the Advanced section. It's the same Advanced button, just with different options. So here where it says Display Rows, I'm going to put here All. And then after I hit All, I hit OK, and then OK. And then what you end up seeing is every single account, even the accounts that were not being used, are showing here, and they're showing a bunch of blanks. Right? That's because we told it that we want to see the accounts that are not being used, and I'll tell you why. A lot of times I build a report for someone, and for example, that month they didn't use any travel, and they say, well, where's my travel? And then if they don't specifically see it with a zero next to it or with a blank next to it, they'll freak out. They'll think the information it's incomplete. Now, some people may be asking, why are you showing blanks there and not zeros? That's actually part of the report formatting. So if I go to Customize Report, and then I go to Funds and Numbers, here I can choose whether I'm going to show hide zero amounts. So in this case, I can show zero amounts, or I can also hide my cents. See that? And then I hit OK. And then you see now it comes up with a bunch of zeros. And I can also hide the cents, which, by the way, a lot of people want to do that. A lot of people really want to hide cents because for whatever reason, you're going to use it for a tax return, or Sense just give you, they just give you more information that you don't need. One thing I tell you though, from my experience, when you show Sense, people get the impression that the numbers are more accurate. There's something about decimals that really give people this impression of accuracy and completeness. So I found it that when I take out the decimals, people think the numbers are being estimated or rounded for some reason, and it is. It's just hiding the decimal. So that's really up to you whether you think it's valuable or not to hide the decimals. Now, also, when you're dealing with anything has to do with sub accounts, notice that there's a little triangle next to any of these accounts. So I can manually click and collapse and expand any of these. So as long as I'm working on, I believe it's QuickBooks 2013 and above, there is that. Now, there's a keyboard shortcut for that, for collapsing it, which is Alt P. If you press Alt P, Alt P, if you can do Alt P, Alt P, it collapses and expands. So Alt P collapses and expands. So I'm just tapping Alt P on the keyboard, collapse and expand. Okay, that's another really important piece. And also, if you're dealing with a lot of data in here, you may also want to hide the header, which all you have to do is hit Alt A, and Alt A will hide the header. So Alt A hides the header, Alt P collapses and expands the sub accounts. All right. As much as I want to go and do this forever, I do have to respect the 1 hour time frame that we promised people we would do. Reports are actually one of my really important areas in which I focus personally a lot in my practice. So I'm very passionate about reports, and I can kind of talk about them all day long. So for next month, we're going to be covering enhanced inventory receiving, which is a QuickBooks Enterprise workflow that's not available in the other versions of QuickBooks. So we'll talk about those in detail. And then hopefully in January, it will be our last QuickBooks episode. We'll talk about importing data, which is the single hardest topic in January because a lot of people had to do a year's worth of data, accountants or whatever. And then hopefully after tax season, we'll start talking about some QuickBooks add-ons and some other technologies as we evolve. So thank you very much for joining the webinar. Visit the website. There's information posted there. Join the Facebook group and continue the conversation there. Please answer the polling question at the end. Kind of let me know if these are good topics and type of things that you'd like to see. Email me, Hector at enterprise.expert or Hector at garciacpa.com if you got any questions. Or if you need, oh yeah, one last thing. Whoops, why didn't I cover this? There is really important. There's a document. I put it right there on the handout section. If you're having a tough time download it, just email me. There's a document I recommend you download, which is called the complete, not this one. Yeah, the complete report list on QuickBooks. So if you actually download this document, it's about 50 pages long. It contains every single default report that QuickBooks has and a description next to it. If you're a consultant, right, you print this out in front of a client or something, and you have them sit down and read what every single report means and highlight the reports that they may be interested on working with. This really enhances any conversation, any interaction with anyone, because most QuickBooks Advanced people understand these reports, but most end users do not. So having this document that has every single default report there, on top of obviously the custom reports that we discussed, this is just a really good conversation starter, and it has a lot of reports that you've never used before. It has a lot of explanations on that. All right, I'll go ahead and stop the recording now. Again, thank you very much for joining the webinar, and I'll see you next month.